Imagine pouring the foundation of a house, expecting the walls to stay put, only to have the architects just, change the laws of physics halfway through the build.
Which sounds like a total nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. And that structural instability is exactly what we are unpacking in this deep dive. Welcome in. Glad to have you with us. This is actually video 1 of 4 in our Road to Doomsday series.
Right, where we are tracking all the lore leading right into Avengers Doomsday.
Exactly. And the main thing for you to keep in mind today is this. The MCU's slow slide toward Doomsday wasn't just random. It traces directly back to time travel rules that, well, nobody fully agreed on.
Yeah, the foundation was pretty shaky from the start.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that foundation, Bruce Banner's rules in Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, so Banner lays out that time travel doesn't work like, a simple rewind button on a VHS tape.
Right.
He says if you travel to the past, that past basically becomes your new future, and your former present becomes a separate, completely unchangeable past.
So practically speaking, the Avengers were never actually in danger of, erasing themselves from existence. They couldn't Marty McFly themselves out of a family photo.
Exactly. No fading away. But it also means that they weren't fixing anything old. They were quietly creating entirely new timelines with every single jump into the past.
Which is wild when you really think about it.
Eh.
But that brings us to the Ancient One's caveat, right?
Oh, yeah. Because her rule kind of complicates Banner's optimism. She points out that if you remove an Infinity Stone from its timeline, that specific reality splits into a much darker branch.
Because it loses its primary defense mechanism, right?
Right. Deprived of the stone's protection, bad things happen. So the plan required returning every stone to the exact moment it was taken.
Wait, but if removing a stone creates a dark branch, how does putting it back fix anything? Is this like secretly returning a stolen library book before the librarian even notices it's gone so the late fee reality never gets a chance to form?
That is a brilliant way to put it. Functionally, yes. By returning the stone to the exact microsecond it was taken, the dark branch doesn't get undone. It is prevented from forming in the first place.
Oh, wow. So the timeline just remains a single thread.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the specific distinction between preventing a branch and simply undoing what already happened, well, that is the seed of the multiversal chaos we see later on.
Okay, but I have a pushback here. If returning the stones perfectly prevents branches from forming, how on earth did Steve Rogers stay in the past with Peggy Carter? Did he create a timeline-breaking variable or not?
Well, that is the big problem. The people who built the movie can't even agree on that.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, the writers, they publicly state that Steve lived out his life quietly in the original main timeline.
So he reunited with Peggy without disrupting anything or making a branch.
Right. But the directors, the Russo brothers, have actually given the total opposite explanation in separate interviews.
Oh, man. That is messy.
Very. They suggest his choice to stay did create a separate branch reality, and he had to consciously jump back to the main timeline to hand over the shield.
So what does this all mean? If the actual architects of the movie don't agree on how time travel works, how stable can this multiverse really be?
I mean, it can't be. That behind-the-scenes disagreement bleeds directly into the narrative, giving us our first real crack in the Endgame rules.
Right. We see that happen during the Loki series.
Exactly. Loki establishes that the multiverse's structure was never as stable as it first appeared.
Oh, like the Pompeii situation.
Yes, the apocalypse loophole. The show introduces this idea that you can make meaningful changes to the past without creating a new branch.
But only if you do it immediately before a predetermined apocalyptic event, right?
Right. Because in that narrow window, the outcome was always going to happen regardless. The volcano wipes out everything anyway.
So the timeline's rules kind of bend under extreme conditions. The timeline accepts variations as long as the ultimate destination remains exactly the same.
Exactly. Which proves the rules were always somewhat flexible. And we're going to leave a thread dangling for you right here. A future video in this series will show how these very rules led directly to universes beginning to collide.
Yes, so the biggest reframing takeaway for you today is that the MCU has never actually settled on one consistent explanation for how time travel and branching work.
Which is pretty fascinating.
It is, and that unresolved instability isn't a writing mistake. It's the exact thing that makes everything the rest of this series covers possible.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. If the timeline's rules bend depending on who is manipulating them, what happens when the universe simply runs out of room for all these overlapping realities?